The sword hidden in a whisper. Not every battle is fought with a sword. Not every victory roars through the air. Some of the most powerful moments in life arrive in silence. One sentence, quietly spoken, but echoing through the chambers of the soul like thunder. You don't need to raise your voice to break a stronghold. And you don't need to prove anything when the truth is already on your side. There is a phrase, simple, calm, and devastating, that can make even the most prideful person break. Not because it's cruel, not because it's loud, but because it reveals a truth they cannot distort, deny, or dominate. And for the narcissist, who has built their identity on control and illusion, that truth is a collapse. This is not about revenge. It is not about getting even. It is about spiritual restoration and emotional clarity. It is about speaking from a place where your wounds have been healed and your identity has been rewritten by the hands of God. Let us walk together into the mystery of this phrase, not just to understand why it breaks the narcissist, but to understand why it frees you. The illusion of power, why the narcissist fears the mirror. To understand why a single phrase can reduce a narcissist to tears, we must first understand the architecture of their world. Not the visible one, the polished smiles, the crafted charm, the surface confidence, but the inner world, the hidden one, the fortress. Because that's what narcissism is at its core. A fortress built out of fear, shame, and a deep unspoken conviction that they are unworthy of love unless they remain in control. From the outside, the narcissist appears powerful. They know what to say, when to say it, and how to twist every moment in their favor. They walk into rooms with certainty, speak with flair, and keep people orbiting around their needs. But this power is not real, it's curated. And like all things built on illusion, it is fragile. That is why the narcissist does not fear confrontation, insult, or even rage. They know how to dance with those. What they fear most is the mirror, the still, unshakable reflection of who they really are beneath the mask. You see, the narcissist's life is a carefully edited narrative. Every relationship is a stage, every conversation a script. And anyone who begins to speak unscripted truth becomes a threat to the structure they've spent years, sometimes a lifetime, building. They depend on denial, on your silence, on your confusion. They thrive when you doubt yourself, when you soften your convictions to keep the peace, when you tiptoe around their reactions because you've been conditioned to fear their wrath. But something shifts when you heal, when your soul begins to wake up from the fog of manipulation and starts remembering who you are, not who the narcissist said you were, but who God says you are. And in that awakening, your voice changes. It's not louder, it's quieter but firmer. It doesn't plead anymore. It doesn't try to win approval. It simply speaks truth. And that truth does not attack, it reflects. That's why one sentence can make a narcissist cry. Not because it wounds them physically or emotionally, but because it reflects back a reality they've worked endlessly to suppress. They are no longer in control of the narrative. They can no longer shape how you see yourself. The spell is broken. And in that moment, they are forced to face what they fear most. Not you, but the truth about themselves. It is here we find the spiritual layer of this moment, the part psychology cannot fully explain. There is something eternal in the collapse of a lie. The narcissist, like all proud souls, has not merely constructed a defense mechanism, they have constructed an idol. An image of themselves they worship and force others to worship. And when someone dares to stand, not in rebellion, but in quiet, God-given clarity, that idol cracks. This is not the kind of crying that comes from repentance. Though we can pray, it leads there. It is a tear of exposure, of spiritual nakedness, like Adam in the garden when his eyes were opened and he realized he was bare. The narcissist cries because for a brief moment They are no longer the one with the power. You are. And not because you took it, but because you finally gave it back to God. Pride is spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. C.S. Lewis. And this is why narcissists fear those who heal. Not because healed people fight harder, but because they no longer play the game. A healed person speaks with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to prove their worth. And the narcissist has no weapon against that kind of stillness. The phrase that makes them cry. It's not a threat. It's not a roar. It's not a list of grievances or a dramatic goodbye. It's a mirror. And for the first time, they cannot look away. But if it's truth that exposes the illusion, then what gives that truth its power? The answer lies not in how loud you speak it, but in the kind of soul you've become before you speak. The weight of authority. Why this phrase cannot be spoken in bitterness. Before a sword can cut, it must be forged. And before your voice can carry the kind of authority that breaks chains and silences manipulation, it must first pass through the fire of refinement. The phrase that makes the narcissist cry is powerful, not because of the arrangement of its words, but because of the authority behind them. And authority cannot be faked. It must be born from the soil of healing, the ashes of surrender, and the unwavering identity found in Christ. There is a reason why shouting never works with narcissists. They feed on emotional chaos. They know how to twist your volume into aggression, your pain into instability. If you yell, they'll call you crazy. If you plead, they'll call you needy. If you accuse, they'll say you're obsessed, because that is their system of survival. Discredit, deflect, diminish. But when you speak from peace, the game ends. They have no script for that, no way to distort it. Do not mistake stillness for weakness. It is the ground on which eternal things are built. C.S. Lewis. This is why you must not speak the phrase while your soul is still bleeding. A wounded heart cries out for validation. A healed heart simply declares truth. The difference is not the volume, but the spiritual resonance. One comes from desperation, the other comes from identity, and the narcissist can smell the difference. If you say, you no longer have power over me, but deep down you still believe their opinion of you matters, the phrase will fall flat. Not because it isn't true, but because you haven't fully owned it yet. Authority is not in the words. It is in the transformation that gave birth to them. Before David could face Goliath, he had to face the lion and the bear in the secret places. Before Jesus spoke truth to the Pharisees, he spent 40 days in the wilderness being tested. And before you can confront the narcissist, you must confront the broken places in your own soul, the part of you that stayed too long hoping they would change, the part that believed you weren't worthy of more. And this healing is not a performance. It is sacred. Sometimes it happens over time, sometimes in moments of divine clarity. But it always begins the same way, with a surrender of the need to be loved by someone who never truly knew how to love. Because until you lay that down, you will always speak half-truths. Statements coated in resentment, declarations laced with pain, and the narcissist will catch it. They always do. They will turn your pain into proof that they were right about you all along. But speak from healing. Speak from a place where you no longer want revenge, only peace. And something miraculous happens. Your voice stops echoing in their arena. It rises above it. The narcissist expects you to grovel, to rage, to try to explain yourself. But when you look at them, eyes calm and soul anchored in God, and say the phrase with no need for reaction, no hunger for recognition, no desire to prove anything, you rise into a realm they cannot enter. Because spiritual authority is not earned in argument. It is bestowed in intimacy with God. The man who kneels before God can stand before anyone, C.S. Lewis. And make no mistake, they feel it. When your words are no longer coated in fear, the narcissist loses the only weapon they truly had, control over your mind. They realize they cannot twist what you say, because what you've spoken is not a strategy, it is a sentence, rooted in a deeper truth than they can touch. This is why the phrase, "You no longer have power over me, because I know who I am in God," must not be spoken lightly. It is not a tactic, it is a testament, a marker that the one who once begged for breadcrumbs is now sitting at the table of the king. You don't speak it to win, you speak it because you've already won the moment you stop trying to win them. And here is where the true fear of the narcissist begins. Not when you raise your voice, but when they can no longer reach your heart. Not when you fight for space, but when they realize you've moved to a world where their voice no longer echoes. So take your time. Let God finish His healing in you. Let Him stitch your soul with His truth. And when that moment comes, when you are ready not just to say the phrase, but to be the phrase, it will not only break their illusion, it will set your legacy free. Because when your voice is shaped by healing and not by hatred, you don't just confront a person, you step into a divine pattern that has existed since the beginning. God, humbling the proud and lifting up the broken. God's pattern never changes. He humbles the proud and raises the broken. It is tempting to believe that our experiences with narcissists are uniquely modern, products of a culture addicted to self and fame. But the spirit of narcissism is not new. It is ancient. It was there in the garden when the serpent whispered, "You will be like God." It was there when Pharaoh hardened his heart against Moses. It was there when Saul, once chosen by God, clung to his throne in fear of David. And it was there in the religious leaders who couldn't stand the simplicity and authority in the voice of Jesus. The Bible does not ignore pride. It exposes it, it dissects it, and more importantly, it shows what God does with it. God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble, James 4:6. The proud build towers, but God confuses their speech. The proud hoard power, but God tears it from their hands. The proud sit on thrones they weren't meant to keep, and God replaces them with shepherd boys, with women of courage, with the overlooked and underestimated. That is His pattern, and it has never changed. This is the holy reversal. God exalts those who were humiliated and brings down those who exalted themselves on the backs of others. And nowhere is this clearer than in the moment someone like you, a person long silenced, long dismissed, stands up not with violence but with truth, with clarity, with peace. When you speak that phrase, "You no longer have power over me, because I know who I am in God," you are not just making a personal statement. You are stepping into the divine story of how God lifts the lowly and brings the proud to their knees. And it terrifies them, because narcissists, though they wear the mask of superiority, live in secret terror of being insignificant, of being ordinary, of being seen for who they really are, flawed, insecure, desperate for control, because they have none within. They wear their pride like armor, not because they are strong, but because they are deeply afraid. So when someone once under their thumb speaks a truth they can't twist, a truth spoken without rage, without tears, without begging, they are exposed, not just in your eyes, but in their own. and it reminds them, not intellectually, but spiritually, that they are not God. That's what makes them cry. They cry because the phrase removes the illusion of dominion. It speaks to the soul, not the ego. And the soul, made by God, whether it resists Him or not, trembles in the presence of truth. This is why Scripture doesn't instruct us to fight pride with pride. It teaches us to let God do the humbling. The Apostle Paul didn't preach by force. He preached by testimony. Jesus didn't outwit the Pharisees with clever debate. He spoke with such authority and purity that their pride simply couldn't hold up. He said things like, "You are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but full of death within." Matthew 23:27. He didn't scream it. He didn't insult them. He simply told the truth. That truth did more than any rebuke. It shattered their grip on power and unmasked their motives before the people. Likewise, when you speak your phrase, your declaration of freedom, not only does it shake the narcissist, it begins to stir the spirits of those who have been watching silently. Children, friends, colleagues, congregants. They see that truth can stand without shouting, that freedom can be found without rebellion, and that God's justice still moves through the softest voices. Because God does not need noise to bring down the proud. He needs clarity, timing, and a vessel that is no longer willing to bow. And that, my friend, is who you are becoming. You are stepping into a holy sequence, one that began long before you and will continue long after. But in this generation, in your home, in your marriage, in your workplace, in your church, you might be the one God uses to break the pattern. Not by force, but by truth, not by anger, but by surrender. Because when a narcissist hears that one sentence, and they realize that the same power they use to dominate you has vanished into thin air, they aren't just witnessing a human decision, they are encountering a divine reversal. God is humbling the proud, and He is raising the one they tried to bury. And in every generation, that divine reversal begins with one voice, one truth, one phrase, spoken not from the flesh, but from identity. And that phrase is where everything begins to shift. The phrase that sets you free and breaks their control. The most dangerous weapon in the hand of the narcissist is not what they say, it's what you forget. You forget who you are. You forget what God said. You forget your own strength, your own value, your voice. That is their true craft, to distort your perception of reality until you no longer trust your own discernment, until you flinch at silence, until you crave their approval even while drowning in their cruelty. But the moment you remember, truly remember who you are in God, the spell is broken. And what breaks it is not some elaborate confrontation or hours of argument. It is not a monologue soaked in emotion or an outburst of accumulated pain. What breaks it is one sentence, spoken not from a place of anger, but from identity. You no longer have power over me, because I know who I am in God. This is not just a phrase. It is a spiritual earthquake. It is the declaration of a soul returning to its rightful owner. It is not said for the narcissist. It is said for you. When you speak it, something ancient shatters, not just in the room, but in the invisible realm where spiritual patterns were long held in place. The phrase breaks the architecture of manipulation because it removes the foundation upon which it stood, your former dependence on their validation. Let us be clear. Narcissists build their kingdom on borrowed power. Not physical strength, not moral integrity, but on the internal surrender of the ones they manipulate. Every moment you stayed silent to avoid conflict. Every time you excused their behavior. Every compromise you made in order to keep the peace. Every moment you whispered, "Maybe it's my fault." Those were building blocks. But this phrase, "you no longer have power over me," is the wrecking ball that brings it all down. And what makes it burn in their ears is not the content, but the conviction that it no longer matters whether they believe it, you do. The power they once held was never in their hands. It was in your willingness to hand over your identity. And now you've taken it back. They can't stop you because you're not asking for permission anymore. You're not explaining. You're not defending. You're not shrinking. You're not bending so they can feel taller. You're standing, rooted in something far deeper than human validation. Divine confirmation. You are not what they called you. You are not who they failed to see. You are who God designed before they ever had the chance to name you. C.S. Lewis spiritually imagined. This phrase is not about defeating the narcissist. It's about declaring an inner resurrection. You no longer exist in the same space where their weapons work. Their gaslighting has no traction. Their silence has no grip. Their smirks, their threats, their cold withdrawal, it all falls flat because what once terrified you has been replaced by something deeper, peace. And this peace is not passive, it's not soft. It's steel wrapped in silence. It is the power of someone who no longer needs to react, someone who can stand still and know that they are held by something unshakable. And the narcissist, though they might rage or collapse or pretend not to care, will feel it, that shift, that stillness, that void of control where they once reigned. They will look into your eyes and see that their reflection no longer matters to you. And in that moment, they will feel the terror of a God dethroned. Because for years, perhaps decades, they sat on the throne of your emotions. They dictated your joy. They rationed your worth. They tossed breadcrumbs of affection just to keep you coming back. But now, they are no longer your source. God is. And the narcissist cannot compete with that. They cannot rewrite identity sealed by the Holy Spirit. They cannot compete with peace that passes understanding. They cannot manipulate someone who is no longer trying to be loved by them. So they cry. Maybe not in front of you, maybe not where others see, but they break in places they've tried desperately to keep fortified. Not because you cursed them, not because you exposed their secrets, but because, for the first time, you are no longer under their influence. This is the victory that doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to be understood by others. It is quiet but cosmic. It is personal but prophetic. You have come out from under the yoke. And it all began with one phrase, not shouted, not begged, just declared, like a stone dropped into the sea of lies, sending waves into everything false. You no longer have power over me because I know who I am in God. Let that sentence become your anthem, your boundary, your prayer. Let it be the beginning of generational change. Let it mark the day your soul returned to its true alignment. Because when you speak it, you're not just ending their control. You're beginning your legacy. But make no mistake, when you speak that phrase, its power doesn't end with you. It begins to multiply through every eye that sees, every ear that hears, and every heart that dares to believe they can be free too. When you speak that phrase, freedom doesn't end. It begins to multiply. What if I told you that the moment you speak, you no longer have power over me because I know who I am in God. Something far bigger than your personal freedom is set in motion. You see, freedom in God is never self-contained. It is like light. Once kindled, it spreads. One candle lit in the dark does not just burn alone. It reveals, it awakens, it invites others to see what they could not see before. And that is precisely what your courage begins to do the moment you reclaim your voice. For perhaps years you endured manipulation in silence. You shrank yourself to avoid conflict. You covered for them to keep the peace. You walked on eggshells while they walked on your dignity. But now, standing in the clarity of God-given identity, your life becomes a witness, not just to yourself, but to everyone watching quietly from the sidelines. You may not know it, but someone has been watching your suffering. A daughter, a friend, a co-worker, a church member, someone else trapped in a cycle they didn't know how to escape from. They saw how the narcissist controlled you, and they assumed, maybe that's just how things have to be. But then they hear you speak that sentence, not with malice, not to shame, but with sacred certainty. And suddenly, something stirs in them. Could I say that too? That question becomes the seed of a new harvest. Because spiritual freedom is contagious. It reverberates beyond the moment it was spoken. It becomes a door in the spirit realm, one that no narcissist can close, and one through which others begin to walk, sometimes trembling, sometimes crawling, but always moving toward the light. You didn't just speak for yourself. You shattered a generational cycle. You broke the model that told your children love requires obedience to emotional abuse. You ended the script that told your peers strength is staying quiet. You destroyed the lie that told your inner child you're too much to be loved. And now that your mouth is opened, your silence will never be used against you again. This is the holy ripple effect. When one soul speaks from healing, 100 silent hearts begin to believe that healing is possible. You may not have changed the narcissist, but you changed the atmosphere. And sometimes that is the greater miracle. C.S. Lewis, in Spirit. We often think freedom is the final chapter in the story, but biblically, freedom is always the beginning of a new assignment. When the Israelites left Egypt, they weren't just escaping Pharaoh, they were moving toward a promised land. When Paul's chains fell in prison, he didn't flee in chaos. He stayed and preached. And his freedom became the doorway to salvation for the jailer's entire household. And when Jesus rose from the grave, he didn't return to prove his enemies wrong. He walked with the broken, ate with the doubting, and restored what was lost. Freedom is not escape, it's purpose. So, when you speak the phrase that sets you free from narcissistic control, don't stop walking. Don't stop speaking. Don't think the battle is over. In truth, it has only just begun. But this battle is not one of exhaustion, it's one of glory. Because now your words don't just defend your boundaries, they release captives. Every time you say no to manipulation, someone else learns how to say no. Every time you speak truth with love, someone else learns truth isn't cruel. Every time you stop apologizing for breathing, someone else realizes they were never a burden. And this ripple continues into eternity. Because God doesn't just rescue, He redeems. He takes the very places where you were silenced and makes them the platform for your voice. He takes what was stolen, your identity, your joy, your clarity, and uses it to rebuild others. You thought you were fighting for survival, but heaven knew You were rising to become a deliverer. And maybe that's what frightens the narcissist most. Not that you hurt them, but that they can no longer use you to hurt yourself. Because now you know, now you've spoken, now you've remembered who you are. You no longer have power over me because I know who I am in God. That phrase is not the end of a conversation, it is the beginning of a revolution. This is more than a moment of freedom. It is the birth of a new legacy. And if freedom could begin with one sentence, then redemption can begin with one choice. To never forget who you are in God. Again, your freedom is not just for you, it's a call to rise. So here you are. You've come through the silence, through the confusion, through the fog of self-doubt that narcissistic control planted in your mind. You've walked the road of broken identity, questioning your worth, searching for validation in eyes that never knew how to love you, and yet you are still here. Not as a victim, not as someone barely surviving, but as someone waking up to the truth that has always been quietly burning beneath the surface. You are not who they said you were, you are who God says you are. And in that truth, your voice has found its strength again, not to shout, not to destroy, but to declare, calmly, firmly, with eyes full of light and a soul full of God. You no longer have power over me because I know who I am in God. That sentence, spoken from a place of identity, not bitterness, is more than a phrase. It is a boundary, a battle cry, a benediction. It's not the sound of war, it's the sound of resurrection. And once you've spoken it, nothing will ever be the same again. The narcissist may try to pretend they don't care, they may mock, they may rage, they may go silent, but deep down they have heard it. And they know the truth. Their access has been revoked. You no longer live in the room they once occupied. You no longer wear the names they once gave you. You no longer live by the rules they once enforced. You belong to someone higher now, someone truer, someone who calls you beloved, chosen, redeemed. And this is the part they can never undo. But this journey is not just about you, it's never been. God never sets one person free without planting in them the power to lead others into freedom too. Just like Moses, who once stammered before Pharaoh but was sent to liberate a nation. Just like Esther, who rose in silence but spoke in courage. Just like the disciples, who were once scattered and ashamed but later shook the world with one message: Christ has made me new.